All right. Are we on and live, Diana?
Yes, we are.
I assume so. Okay, great. Awesome. Hi, everyone. My name is Shirley Williams. I am a proud member of PGA. I'm a producer, I'm a director. I'm based in New York City, and I'm also one of the representatives for Hue You Know, which you will learn about in a few minutes. So this is a discussion with some powerful leaders of Black, Indigenous, people of color organizations within our industry that you should all know. This panel was inspired by an article that I wrote about some of the organizations that serve people of color that that help bring our stories to life, that put us on the forefront, that are advocates for us. And I wanted the world, I wanted Hollywood, I wanted the industry to know more about it as a way to educate and to provide knowledge, and so that you can get to know us and figure out how you can support us. So what we're going to do right now, I'm going to pass the ball over to these incredible leaders, are an awesome panelists. Thank you so much, everybody, for being here. I'm going to let them introduce themselves. And let's start with Bree. And after our introductions, we'll move right over into some questions that I have for everybody. So let's start with Bree.
Hi, I'm Bree Frank. By day, I'm the Vice President of Physical Production for Hello Sunshine. And then in all my free time, I am the President and founder for Hue You Know, which is an organization that I founded 3 years ago to advocate for BIPOC professionals in media.
Thank you, Bree. Thank you for your time. Thank you for being here. Let's go on to Dolly. Dolly, if you could tell us who you are and a little bit about the organization you represent.
Sure. I'm Dolly Turner. I'm a producer. I have a company called the Turner Group. It's a production, marketing, and social impact company. I'm also on the board of directors for the Black House Foundation, and I am the director of the new Black House Multicultural Producers Fellowship that launched in 2019, and we are in the midst of our second cohort.
Nice. Congratulations.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And thank you for your time. Thank you for being here. Stina, if you could introduce yourself and the organization you represent.
Sure. Hello. Thank you for having me. I am Stina Hamilton. I am Cherokee Choctaw Irish, and I run a post-production facility called East Coast Digital. But I also am a producer, and I have independent projects that I'm working on, and also trying to really build a coalition of where folks can go to find Indigenous writers, crew. So I'm looking forward to partnering with more with all of you guys here on the panel. Yeah, and I produce a podcast called Not Invisible: Native Women on the Frontlines, which has been keeping me busy during COVID, in addition to all of the editorial stuff that we're doing.
Thank you for your time. Thank you for your commitment. Let's go over to Iyabo. If you can introduce yourself and your incredible organization.
Thanks for having me. Hey, everybody. My name is Iyabo Boyd. I'm a writer, director, producer of fiction and documentary films. I'm also the founder of Girls Doc Mafia, which is a collective and an advocacy organization that supports women and non-binary people of color working in the documentary industry.
Thank you. Thank you for being here. Letitia, one of my favorite people ever.
That was nice of you to say. Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Leticia Guillory. I am a writer-producer. I work across mediums, television, film, performance art, and theater. And I am on the board of the Black TV and Film Collective. We're an organization, 1,400 members strong, both in New York and all over the country, and some international. And our passion is helping our folks create content, whether it is episodic, feature, doc. We're here for you. Everything from the lessons on how to get it done to crewing up. So we're here for you. I also would be remiss if I didn't also acknowledge that I am deeply honored to be a Black House Multicultural Producer Lab Fellow this year. So thank you, Dolly, and thank you everyone on the panel.
Oh, that's so awesome. And last but not least, Leslie. Leslie represents an organization that provides so many incredible resources for people of color. I mean, I have been a part of the applying process. I have so many friends who've been awarded some of your awards and your grants, and I just love your organization.
Oh, thank you so much, Shirley. Thanks for having me. Hi, everyone. I'm Leslie Fields-Cruz. I'm the Executive Director of Black Public Media and the Executive Producer of the public media series Afropop, The Ultimate Cultural Exchange. And we support Black filmmakers by funding projects and acquiring content that we distribute via public television. But I am also a board member of New York Women in Film and Television. And so I'm honored to be here and to actually talk about these issues that my organization has been dealing with and working with and trying to push forward Black voices and Black creators for just about 40 years now. So that's it.
Yes, thank you, thank you, thank you, Leslie, for your presence. Thank you for being here and for using your voice to impact change. So these questions aren't directed to anyone specific. I'd like to just put it on the table, and whatever comes up for you, anyone can jump in and can give an answer. So my first question is, how important is it to talk about race when talking about diversity, inclusion, and equity? And why are so many people afraid to discuss it?
I'll go first.
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry. I don't think that you can parse it out and separate it. I think that what's interesting to me as I'm having some of these conversations is that people are afraid to talk about race, but they want diversity, inclusion, and equity. And I am fascinated by it every single time. I think part of it is that as in American culture, you're essentially cultured not to speak about race. It seems impolite. It seems as if you are betraying pleasantries, like you have to be nice about it. And there is no niceness when it comes to the oppression of other human beings. Like you kind of just have to have the conversation and be willing to be transparent and honest. And so what I find is that most people are really most interested in diversity because it seems to be, it's consequential if you're not, because of the awakening that has happened, namely in June when people found out about racism, that they feel like, oh, I just got to get people in. And it's like, no, you need to be able to create space. You need to be able to have equity. You need to be able to have belonging. And BIPOC professionals, when they come into your space, they need to be able to see where their future is. And if you can't discuss that, and even what your home life is like, and whether or not your own life is diverse and inclusive, then why would you expect to come to work and to have a different environment than your own life reflects?
Letitia, was there something you wanted to add?
Exactly that. Exactly what Bree said. I think, the other thing, and she spoke on it just now, is one of the reasons people don't want to talk about it because it shines a light on their own biases, whether they want it to or not, it automatically will. And people don't want to be thought of as unwoke, unprogressive, unmodern, non-affluent. We associate affluence with being aware and the humanities and la 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 la. But the reality is, people do not want to be seen as less or not good people. It matters that they're good people, right? Whereas if you are oppressed, your point of view is simply, no, I exist, I deserve to be seen, I deserve a seat at the table. Hell, I'll even make my own table if I need to, but my existence cannot be always either in opposition or in support of your existence. So I think to have those kind of candid dialogues about, well, what does equity really look like? And what does that really mean? People have been using the word diversity since we were all in pre-K, I'm sure, on this panel. And what that has come up with is we've gone from Black History Day to Black History Week to Black History Month. We have to move past that and engage equity and inclusion. And I would force equity first because it's not separate but equal, but it's what you owe me and the interest. You know, it's the understanding that equity means everything we do is going to include us. It's not going to be just a separate moment. It's not going to be, I like to say that, sometimes they want to treat us like we're the holiday package. You get to have this diversity program, you check that box. Oh, aren't you a good company? And so we have to be willing to let that part go. Not that we should let go of those programs, but we have to also say yes and, as if we were in an improv class. Yes and, so we're going to do this, and then what's the next step for all of the people in those programs? But what about all the people who don't get those 8 seats? So yeah, that's all I was going to say.
And I just also want to add, though, that one of the other challenges about talking about race, especially for BIPOC people, is that it has been punitive. Whenever we have brought it up, we've addressed it, or we've talked about it, we've been fired, we've been harassed, it runs the gamut. And so we also need to make the entire environment so that BIPOC people can call out, racism and inequity and not feel as if they're going to be punished because they're calling it out. And I think that's part of the legacy, that's the history in this country. And we need to allow ourselves to move forward and beyond that.
I think the other thing is that when it comes down to it, in order for equity to be achieved within the constructs of like the power structures and money to pay those people in those positions, that means some people need to step aside, need to step back, need to move out. And so that becomes very uncomfortable for the people who have gotten to those positions, even though they've gotten there with a variety of advantages over other folks of other races. And it's hard for folks to admit that for themselves and to either volunteer to step back or to be named as a person that needs to step back, because I think it's also a human thing. On a certain level, you think, well, I worked really hard. I did this, I did that. And, but folks have a hard time to admit that you also benefited from a set of systems that did not benefit other people. So it's a difficult thing to face on a variety of levels, both like moral and personal and financial, and a sense of who you are and what you've become. And it's difficult for folks to let go and let in new blood, especially when you use the word race, because that then implies something that's something personal about whoever is involved, about that person. It's pointing a finger. Even though it's pointing a finger at all of us, it's hard for people to accept that kind of accountability. That's the issue.
I actually have a question for you, Iyabo. I know I said I wasn't going to direct anything, but you brought up something that prompted my next question. When you people having to take a step back, so why is it important for others to take a step back and let us take a step forward and tell our own stories?
Well, I mean, it's not just tell our own stories for me. I think it's also about sharing an equal piece of the pie or a larger piece of the pie and having the ability to create change, to have power positions, to be funded, to give funding, to have decision-making roles at organizations, on sets, in creative conversations, at every level, really, in the film world for sure. But sorry, your question is, say the first part again.
Yeah, basically, why is it important to allow BIPOC professionals to tell their own stories? For so long, others who are not non-BIPOC people have been telling our stories. Why is it important to let us do that?
Well, I'm sure the other panelists will have so much to say, because we could talk about this one question for an hour, like just the fact that there has been, hundreds of years of inequity in that storytelling is a huge part of how our culture as humans, especially as Americans, has evolved. And we can tell from the state of the world that we're in right now, in terms of politics and like who has power and who doesn't, how that has affected our, the way that we've developed. But it's about authenticity. It's about expression of a person's voice or a group of people's voice. It's seeing things that other folks, white folks, aren't seeing. It's about point of view too, along with having the power to tell a story. You have the power to tell other people how to look at the person you're gazing at, and that includes the bias of the person who's looking. And so when you allow folks who are from a community to assert their own gaze, it really shifts the way an audience or the public can view a certain type of people. And that's one of the most important things that the media has a huge responsibility to do as a part of the greater movement towards equity and inclusion and diversity in our world overall.
Yeah, I would add to that. I mean, especially when we think about the Western world, the United States, Europe, for people of color, our history, our culture, who we are as individuals has been misrepresented historically. So the importance of allowing us to tell our stories is to really retell the story to the world about who we are. Today, when you turn on the television, there are still stereotypical representations of people of color constantly, whether it has to do with crime, whether it has to do with economics, whether it has to do with speech, language, dress, taste, education, intelligence, contributions to the world, science, you name it, we've been represented. And so that is why it's important for us to tell our own stories, because and the misrepresentation has been deliberate, and it continues to be a deliberate misrepresentation of who we are, very marginalized. It in no way, shape, or form really reflects the richness of our cultures.
I'm just going to add that's one of the reasons we launched our Afropop series is in part because I wanted to make sure that public media had a chance to show the breadth of the African diaspora experience, right? Because especially in documentary, there's a lot of pain and trauma that is associated with the Black experience. But as a Black woman, I know that pain and trauma is not all that we're about. And so because we were in a position to advance or to create this series, then we were able to bring in all different types of stories that had, some of them, they were human rights, some of them were sports, some of them profiled, Caribbean artists. LGBTQ. I mean, we've covered so much in the series that really is a demonstration of the breadth of the Black experience. And these are authentic stories, and that's it for. I mean, we feel that's empowering because it allows other people to see that there is no one way to be Black. There is no one way to be of African descent. There are myriad ways, just like there's myriad ways to be Irish and Italian and British and all that other type of stuff, So I think representation it matters, and it's still something that we've got a long way to go. We have not addressed the issues in the way that we should be.
And if I may add, I think that it's really important as a human to tell the whole truth. And when you are not telling Black stories, you are telling a lie. When you are not telling stories about the LGBTQ community, if you are not telling the stories of people who are disabled, Indigenous folks, you are telling a lie. And what so many of us are asking is for you to be a student to your power and to amplify the voices of the marginalized, not because you owe it to us as a charity, not because it's an aside or it's the right thing to do. It is because it is the truth.
I was just gonna, that's a good segue for what I was thinking too. Also just talking about race when we're talking about diversity and inclusion, along with that comes a lot of like us taking it on our, having to educate folks all the time. So that level of, I mean, that's exhausting, right, for everyone. So once you start trying to do, you know, once you start doing that, it's exhausting, right? It's already exhausting anyway. So I guess my point is that, you know, in these diversity and inclusion programs, like, you know, the people, the majority, or who, you know, or white people, or however we want to describe the folks that are in, you know, the power structure is tilted in their favor. I mean, they need to really take the onus on like educating themselves, you know. Now, will they do that? I'm not sure, but that should also be part of the, you know, the training that they have to do. They have to educate themselves, and then we're also going to bring, you know, people of color to the table, and we're going to have these conversations. And those conversations need to be had all the time. Like, not everyone knows everything, and we all have different biases. I mean, there's anti-Blackness, you know, within the Indigenous communities, which we're fighting all the time, you know. So there's Afro-Indigenous people that we're, you know, trying to make sure that we're always including as well, like in our storytelling and things like that. So I feel like from that part to the representation, and we were just talking about, we have a little side group from Brown Girls Doc Mafia, a little side Indigenous girls group that we've been discussing this a lot, and talking about like representation representation and consultation, like for us, like, you know, like let's just get one Indigenous, you know, person in here to like be our writer or whatever, you know, which is that tokenization of things. But it's not just that, but it's got to be, it really has to be like authorship. Like we need to, it's not just representation that we need, but we need authorship to control. And then we also need to also be listened to, like when we're saying, no, that tribe does not exist and they would not do that, or you know, like, you know, Taino people are still alive to this day, they're not extinct. Like we need also for people to believe us too. So there's such a lack of education on the other side that it is, you know, I feel like that's just I think that should be discussed more, I guess, is my point.
I'm going to jump in, piggyback on Indigenous cultures and the great imaginary, if you will. And I could even stretch this out, not just to on this side of the water in the United States, but I also think all over the world. You know, there is, unfortunately, our entertainment in this country has a history of turning a version of ourselves, whether Indigenous or brown or Black, or Asian, into this caricature, this cartoon that is so pervasive that people really accept that as a reality. I think of when Aida on Broadway and how problematic that was for me, that it was treated by Disney as if Nubians were an imaginary people, when in fact, no, they're alive and well and kicking in Upper Egypt. They are real, you know, you know, the various nations that are right here in New York City are very real. These are not imaginary spaces. And I think when we as producers determine, you know, when we're picking a slate and what kind of stories we want to tell, it's exciting to me to be in a position to challenge and say, you know, I'm looking for stories that are not identical to my own genealogy, but represent my value system for my company and for who I am as an artist and a person. And so when I think of that, I think of, you know, I've certainly done community engagement with large powwows with Red Hawk Native American Arts. I've presented films. I've done all of this, but I've also done this in various cultures. And I can say, Shirley, that as we are thinking about our own work, that we also build a coalition of, let's be BIPOC out here in these streets, because we do need each other. You know, we do need each other. You know, someone asked me POC versus BIPOC. And you know, I said, you know, it's not a versus. We're talking about the history in these United States, if I go bigger, in the Americas. And what we're talking about are the two cultures that this entire wealth has been built on top of. And so when we use a term like BIPOC, what we are saying is we're acknowledging the economics of our labor and the economics, honestly, of our oppression, and that we are acknowledging that coalition needs to exist to break us free from that and move forward, you know?
Thank you. Thank you.
You're
That's
welcome.
so good. Thank you. How can we shift the way audiences think about Black characters in television and film?
Dolly, you're muted.
I think, you know, having people in the writer's room, I think having producers who are and production executives at networks and studios insisting that, you know, writers' rooms are diverse, and that the writers that are in that room are empowered, and that there's a certain level of accountability that goes along with that, that from the very beginning, a tone, you know, there's a mandate that's set that, you know, this is, we are going to adhere to, you know, best practices and standards. And we're also going to take the time to actually perhaps take the time to have even people inside of our company who are BIPOC read some of the scripts or give us feedback, you know, once we've completed something so that we get their opinion about it. Those executives inside of the company should really be brought into the rooms where decisions are made. Sometimes the projects are completed, you know, there's a blow up, and then you wondered, well, what happened when there were tons of people, you know, sitting in the hallway or in the company who would have been more than happy to give you an honest opinion about how people have been portrayed.
Yeah, for sure. I think about Lovecraft Country, which I'm obsessed with, right? And just the idea, last night when I watched the finale, I wept at the beauty of the freedom of the way that that series was executed, because it's something that I've never seen before. It didn't fit any particular box. And there was a space created to tell the truth of whatever that moment was. And so I think that how audiences feel about Black, Indigenous people of color is based on what they've been fed a lot of times, unless you are the person that's being misrepresented and then you just want to see a version of yourself on camera. And so I think that rather than you know, people in positions of power giving audiences what they think, how they perceive, you know, someone's otherness, then allow the people who actually live the experience to tell the stories, and it will shift and change the way people see folks. Like if you think about early representations of Indigenous people or Black people on camera, how many people that was their only interaction with Blackness or Indigenous folks. And then as time, you know, evolved and people evolved and you were allowed to be more free, as you told more stories, people understood us to be in another way. But it's still problematic, right? You're still seeing things that are not completely reflective of our entire story. And so I think that there is a responsibility of organizations to allow for us to have a seat at the table, have the equity, and have the power to say, this is the story that I want to tell. And you are essentially amplifying voices of things that you don't understand, right? Like that's so much of it, is that you're not going to understand it because it's not your culture, but you have to believe the people in the room that are saying, I'm telling you that this is art.
If I could just chime in on that too, I love Lovecraft Country, or County, I always say it, as well. And there's a Two-Spirit Indigenous character in there that dies really quickly, and that's been a little controversial, but hey, it's like a conversation, you know what I mean? And it's like those that's like we need to be having those conversations amongst ourselves too, and that's okay. And I feel like if everyone would just, you know, if everyone would just be okay with that, that's like one small step. Like it's okay, you know, to talk about these things. The other thing that I was going to say is just about for us, like I'm working on a couple of projects and there's a crisis about missing and murdered Indigenous women in this country and in Canada. And so there's a lot of documentaries that are happening out there. There's and a lot of Native folks that are doing this work and doing it responsibly. But then there's some, executives at these high levels who have the power, who are they're just like greenlighting things to people who should not be telling those stories, and that they're trying to scramble to like build, try to find the right people when they really shouldn't be telling, like, especially for something like about missing and murdered Indigenous women and, and girls and Two-Spirit folks. So it's like, that to me seems so crazy. And that's just like one story that I'm like dealing with right now for a project that I'm on. And then also just because a lot of these, there's a lot of, this is all, in documentaries, of course, there's a long history of the wrong people, like, really diving into this, this scene, and let me just cover this. This looks so interesting, like as far as like for Indigenous stuff like Standing Rock and all of these other, big, there's been a lot of problematic, documentaries made, which we all know, but again, we just need to keep having these need to keep having these sort of conversations. Like, I think that is just the most important thing. Like, that's it. It's just that simple.
I think also to piggyback on that, the importance of our organizations in this conversation with the industry is, I mean, what you're talking about, Stina, is a really good example of that, that there are organizations that exist that can open up a dialogue, that can in effect become a pipeline to talent and expertise that is beyond, the wonderful fellowships that exist. But again, 8 seats, really, when there are thousands of us. And we know content is king right now. It has always been, but it really is right now. So there's a wealth out there that is waiting for us to take part in. And I think it's important, as we are in our organizations doing what we can in the way that we do it, that we remember, and to all of you all that are listening now, that we're a resource to have these conversations. It would be wonderful to have panels where we're having this discussion, or we're part of the team on a docuseries that is part of the consultancy. That, no, this is our lived experience. I'm brought in because this is my passion. This is my lived experience. This is my advocacy. Dare I say, my ministry, if I'm going to uplift and save people's lives, because the thing is, whether we realize it or not, some of our content really is about saving lives. Sometimes our stories, when they get out there, open up opportunities for justice where it may have been denied. Here, I'm thinking of the Sandra Bland doc. The case had been left. All of a sudden, now, interestingly enough, wasn't a Black woman telling that story. However, there was an ally who was pushing the story forward, right? And to be clear, allies are always welcome if you're ready to do the work. If you're simply there for the photo op, I don't know. But if you're there to do the work, we're here for you. We've always been here. So I look at that doc, and then I look at the legal ramifications after the fact. So it's not that we are, we're not brain surgeons, we're not rocket scientists, we're clear about what we do. But when you give voice, this goes back to your question about why is it so important for us to tell our stories? Because in some instances, it's a matter of whether someone's justice will happen, and or will we be able to prevent someone else from being murdered? Because we are placing the story in the context of human beings, not just a meme, not just a news blip, not just a moment for a political pundit, but these are actual people's lives, and these are people's families, especially when we're talking in the world of documentary, but not only there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would just piggyback on that, and I would say, I'm going to put on my diversity, inclusion, and equity hat. I'm the diversity, inclusion, equity person at a large entertainment corporation. You have a diversity, equity, and inclusion member on your team. I think that this is a wonderful time for you to open your doors and consider having very intensive focus groups with your employees, focus groups with the members of your organization, meaning the members of the guild, people who are leaders in the industry, people who are nonprofit organizations like ourselves. You should be inviting us in to sit down and have a conversation and help you work through it. You know, we have been in the trenches of doing diversity for a long time. We actually are your talent development pipeline. Quiet as it's kept, we are the talent development pipeline. By the time you learn about the people who become the stars, they've already walked through our doors. We were responsible for helping to cultivate their talent, encourage them, fund them, support them, and actually in many ways introduce them to some of you and your colleagues. I don't know that we're necessarily all sitting at the table when you're having these conversations. We're very committed with no bottom line other than supporting the growth and development of people in the industry. We're not earning any extra money by doing this. However, I do think you should pay us a consulting fee because we are the experts. You should be inviting us in for those roundtable discussions, for those charrettes to get our opinion. You should really consider doing surveys with all of your diverse members to get their feedback. You should be doing qualitative and quantitative data to find out what we believe are the solutions to the problems, what we think challenges are, where we see opportunities, and what we'd really like. Otherwise, you're making decisions in a vacuum. They will not be sustainable. If you're really interested in making a commitment, you've got to dig a little bit deeper, and you've got to also open up your pocketbook. You know, one of the things that I'll be very frank that I see, you know, happening, I consider SAG-Indy and WGA to be leaders when it comes to diversity. They've made a commitment. They show up. They don't just show up at the Oscars. They don't just show up with the large production companies for those events. They go to all of the festivals. When you pick up the phone and call them, they call you back. They know who all of us are. They've been to our events. They've actually helped provide financial support for our programming. But I don't necessarily see that, unfortunately, across the board. And not for any sort of embarrassment, but I think that that's an opportunity for the Guild to step up and step forward. We are small nonprofit organizations. And yes, all nonprofit organizations have challenges now. But one of the reasons why the WGA, particularly the WGA West and SAG-Indy, have great access to talent and deep, diverse programs is because they've made a real legitimate, consistent commitment to it. I've been working with the WGA West since 2007. For our producers program, when I picked up the phone, it wasn't a negotiation. I didn't have to chase for a meeting. I got on the phone and I explained what I wanted to do, and I got an immediate yes. When the executive director of SAG-Indy, Darian Gibson, when I picked up the phone and I called her, I got an immediate yes, I want to support this. This is important. I'm going to make myself available personally. There are some other places that you call and, you know, I don't pick up the phone because it's too much of a challenge. It's an uphill battle. And then you don't want to invest. You don't want to invest. And so when you don't invest your time and you don't invest your money, it means that there is a question about your commitment. And I think for communities of color, we recognize that. We see that. And, you know, it's very important when you think about growing and building your membership. I'm sure that, you know, it's going to be important now to grow and build your membership. Don't walk in the door empty-handed. Do not walk in the door empty-handed because it will not be well received.
Wow, Dolly, thank you for being so bold and courageous and forward. That's what we need. That's it. I support what you say 100%, and that's what we need. That's what those are the actions that need to take place. So thank you for saying that so clear and so concise. If anyone in the audience has questions, you can submit questions. We have about 15 minutes more left. Oh, that came through fast. Hold on one second. Okay, so let me read this first. Oh, okay. Okay. Dan asked, I'm a white male producer developing a project based on a true story with BIPOC content, and I'm actively seeking my BIPOC producing partner, person or company, plus writer and director. Who can I speak with at your organizations in fulfilling my quest? So Dan, let me think. I can get everybody's contact information and maybe have Diana send a blast out to all of the attendees. Also, if you research the article that I wrote, you could literally write BIPOC Refinery 29. All of them are featured in that article. Also, they're all featured in the RSVP link for this, but I will work with Diana to make sure all attendees get their contact information.
Can I jump on something like that? At the Black House Foundation right now, we're actually have culled a pretty deep database of people who are below the line and above the line. And we're in the process of making those, introductions to studios. I think one of the things, and I took the time to actually do a quick little poll with my producer friends. I think one of the things that's really needed in terms of growth and opportunity for producers in the business is that we need some shadowing programs. We also need a commitment that when you're hiring, and the WGA East actually introduced legislation about 2 years ago that was going to require that a certain number of writers a certain number of people of color writers had to be part of the writers' room. That should really be part of what the Guild is doing. Guild is doing as well on your productions. Now, if we're going to make a real commitment to diversity, we have to be able to have quantifiable outcomes. There should be a certain percentage of people that are on your sets, not just at the lower rung, not just as a production assistant, but all the way up, in order to create more opportunity. I'll give you an example. We were working with the studio recently, and they wanted to identify producers and line producers who had worked on $50 to $100 million films. That was difficult to find. The reason why is the studio wanted people who had done it before. Well, guess what? If you're not willing to give that person the opportunity to jump from 20 or 30 to 50, you'll never have any person in that category. So I think shadowing programs, apprentice programs for people who are mid-career, who are ready to take that step up to a higher level, I think are critically important.
Yeah, can I add?
I was gonna ask you to step in.
This is like one of the most important things when I'm trying to have conversations with so many organizations, like so many companies, when they're trying to look at like people who are qualified and looking at what the metrics of what that means. Because you have to acknowledge that for years and years and years, there was an access problem to projects in Hollywood. And so if you now are awakening to the oppression of folks, right? You have to acknowledge the lack of access. And so just because someone has not done a $50 to $100 million project, it doesn't mean that they're not qualified, right? And so you have certain producers who they don't have any issues getting work. Like they're always going to be able to find opportunities because they're hot. They're, they made it through the several rungs of oppression, the oppression Olympics, and they're a hot commodity. And then you have all these other folks who are qualified, but they need access and opportunity. And you can't necessarily move the needle forward when it comes to diversity and inclusion without acknowledging the systematic oppression that fed into a place where you can't find a group of people, right? And so there are plenty of line producers that can do the job and they can kill the job, but they haven't had access or opportunity, right? And so a shadowing program is something that is quite necessary just so you can see if someone like has the chops to do it, but you can't have this metric of saying like, well, I'm looking and they're not there. It's like, yes, they are, one. B, they could be there, but you have to acknowledge the system that's in place. One of the examples I use all the time is that if you think about the 1940s, when like white women started going to work, Black women have always worked, right? Like we've always worked, right? When white women had access, they were allowed to be secretaries and front facing at a lot of these organizations, but they weren't allowed to climb up, right? And the reason why I'm removing Black women from this conversation particularly is because we couldn't even get in the door of a lot of these companies. Now, the women that were able to get in these positions, they could have been the president of the company in the same way that the Black women who were set to be the cleaning staff could be the president, but you have to acknowledge the lack of access and the ceiling and the weight that has been put on their shoulders saying that they're not qualified. And the moment that weight was lifted and the glass ceiling started to shatter, you see women climb up and you see them climb up. But you have to acknowledge that even though women had access to the workspace, if you look at how many women CEOs there are from the 1940s when they can only do telegrams and be secretaries, it's still appalling that there are not enough. Does that mean that there are not enough women who are qualified enough to run these Fortune 500 companies? No, it means that there is a systematic issue that is not allowing people into that space. And so that is what I mean. You need to be a student to your power, right? You have to acknowledge that you have power and understand that you are getting it wrong because the constitution of your company is your About Us page. There is nothing else. If your About Us page and every single person that you integrate, anyone that you come into contact with is white, then that is your constitution. And if you want to get it right, then get it right. But you need to give access. And that is like, that's it.
Wow. I'm sorry. I just have to say that was incredible. Be a student to your power. That's like, everybody needs to write that down for yourselves. And just for completely innocent self-promotion, Girls Doc Mafia has a database of over 600 members working all around the world. You can sort it by geography, by experience level, by role, and you can just hire folks. You can contact them directly on there. I can put it in the chat if that's allowed, but it's browngirlsdocmafia.com/members. But thank you, Bree.
Yeah, thank you, Iyabo. Bree, my brain is so stuck on the your About Us is your About Us page is your constitution. It's like it's making a lot of stuff make sense for me right now. Leslie, were you gonna say something?
Yeah, I was just, I mean, I think I want to, I'm going to put this out there that, you know, oftentimes at Black public media, we do have white producers that come to us and they are seeking a co-producer or a director. And that's fine. I'm happy to try to make those connections. And sometimes I've been approached where we're looking for someone who can be an intern. It's like, I'm not going to give you someone who's an intern when I know that there's someone who's much more capable of being your co-producer. But I also want to put out there for our allies to really think about the story that you want to tell that's coming from or centered or about a BIPOC community. I think that you need to ask yourself the question, is that your story to tell, one? And two, has that story already been told so many times in the same way that it doesn't need to be told by you at all? And that's really, I mean, I don't want to put a damper on anybody's, you know, creative vision, but I believe that, or I will say in my experience, I have seen so many of BIPOC stories, our stories told in the same way, and yet they want to bring on a BIPOC producer or director to work with them, to help them. but it ends up becoming the same story. Whereas when a BIPOC producer comes and they're saying, I have this story to tell, most of the time, in my experience, those stories are much more unique, much more nuanced, because it's coming from the experience in which that producer has lived. And so that's something I'll just put out there to the constituency to ask yourself, is this a story that you need to tell?
We're getting a few requests about how to reach the organizations, which is great because that's what we want. We want partnership. We want to communicate. We want to pair up. So Bree, could you talk a little bit about because this is a resource. This is one way in which you can find BIPOC talent. Can you talk a little bit about our partnership with Staff Me Up?
Yes, certainly. So a year ago, I spoke on a PGA panel and I met the owner of Staff Me Up, Jared Tobin. He wanted my insight on why or why not I would use a Staff Me Up. And so through those conversations, we had some very candid discussions about Staff Me Up and its like grading system for people who are qualified. And so through that, I met Danny Rosenberg, and I talked about having like a diversity and inclusion filter to kind of address diversity for people who are looking. I look at diversity as grapes, and the vine to me is the institution that exists for companies. And so what it allowed us to do, because Shirley, you know, from Hue, like people would reach out and then we would scavenge to find out who people were and then put them forward to these different production companies and producers. And so the Staff Me Up partnerships allow you to go onto their site, post for these positions that you want, and to be able to filter through, click the diversity and inclusion filter, and then it kind of sends like a bat signal out to 22 other BIPOC affiliations, and then you can get access to our organizations in our database and be able to crew up for some below the line and above the line positions. It does not speak to inclusion, equity, or belonging, but it does help you check the diversity box. And so that partnership takes the labor off of you know, Brown Girls and Doc Mafia and all these like places where we were like physically looking for all these people, and it allows access to our groups, but without asking for our free labor.
Awesome. And we have 4 minutes left. If you all you've poured into us, and I'm so grateful. Thank you. If you can now tell us how we can support your organization, if your organization has some immediate needs, if some long-term goals that we can support, feel free to put those on the table.
I'll say we need funding.
Like, I'm going to say everybody needs funding.
We all need funding.
We all need funding.
Yes.
Visibility, access, opportunity.
We need access, opportunity, and funding. That's what we need.
That's what we need.
Yes.
I would say that all of that, absolutely. And then, you know, as we say that specifically, we definitely want support around creating shadow programs. You know, we have a fellowship at the Black TV and Film Collective that we're in partnership Wavelength Productions with, and it's wonderful. It was in deadline a couple of days ago, and we encourage people to apply. But for those of you on this particular Zoom, I'm imagining you're past that moment. And what we would like to see is some, you know, be able to build more opportunities for us to partner and create opportunities for our members, but not just our members, for everyone. You know, we have a number of talks and educational moments that are for everyone, whether they're members or not. And I'd like to see us build on that. And we have partnered with several other organizations here, if not all of you. I think, Stina, we might be the only one we haven't worked with, and I'd like to see more of that happen as well. But like everybody, we need funding. We're a nonprofit. What can I say?
Yeah, I think, you know, we are all small nonprofits. And so I think holistically, here's what I would say. In thinking about your commitment to diversity and inclusion, as producers, as production companies, as a guild, making a commitment can happen in two ways. You can make a commitment by making an investment. I can guarantee you that each one of our organizations' annual budgets is significantly less than yours. I think that once you start to make that investment, it gives you an opportunity to cultivate new members, to put yourself in front of a community that you say you would like to work with, that you want to be part of your members. And I think that the community is very astute. They're very smart, they're very insightful. And I think commitment means more now than it ever has before. And so in creating partnership and opening doors for opportunities, you have to come through the door. You have to sit at our table, you have to have a conversation. I also think that it's going to be important for you to think about what your, investment is going to be in talent. Think about how many people you could potentially hire on your sets, how many people you could actually invite to be part of your shadowing program, to be a mentor. All of us have some sort of fellowship or educational program. Please send us your best and brightest producers, your most successful producers, because they probably have the financial wherewithal to hire more people. And they probably have the financial wherewithal to hire people at a more senior level. I can guarantee you that once you put one of those people of color in those positions, they're going to open the door to more people of color, and it's going to allow you to start populating people up and down the food chain. At Black House Foundation, this is our second fellowship initiative, and we are looking for shadowing opportunities, for mentor opportunities, and for co-production and collaboration opportunities. We have some amazing fellows, biggest film at Sundance this year, executive producer for 40-Year-Old Version. We have gifted playwrights and scripted series writers and producers like Letitia. We have producers that are making their transition from unscripted to scripted, but have worked with every single major network. So the talent is there in each one of our organizations. What we really need now is your partnership. We need your commitment.
And it's a long-term commitment.
Yes,
it's a long-term commitment, because this work, it's going to take that long-term commitment if we really want to take advantage of the change we want to see for the future.
Yeah, I'll just agree with everything that's been said and say that if anyone's an ally and they're looking for ways to be involved, I put in the chat an ally listserv that you can sign up for. The plan is to share that listserv with these organizations here at the table and other BIPOC orgs, so that we can put folks to work if they'd like to be put to work.
Yeah.
So ally, feel free to sign up there.
In my short focus group I did before this panel, the two things that kind of rose to the top for accomplished filmmakers, producers of color, were more access to information about jobs that are coming up and an opportunity to really connect with you, to interview and be considered for those jobs.
Awesome. Wonderful. All right. Well, that concludes our discussion. Thank you all for your insight, for your wisdom, for your knowledge and sharing it. I'm so grateful, and I'm pretty sure everyone who attended is as well. That's it. Thank you so much. Have a good night. Thank you all.
Good night.
Great.
Bye-bye.
Thank you
so much.
Thanks so much. Appreciate it.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Good night.